but we cannot close our eyes to tanks that are crossing the border from Russia and coming in to Ukraine.
Secretary of State John Kerry in Ukraine today, urging Russia to come to the table and end the bloody conflict that has already killed over 5,300 people since April. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Franzen in New York. Also today, the leaders of France and Germany announced a surprise summit, bringing their own proposal to end the fighting. Let's go to ABC's Kirit Radia in Moscow. Hi, Kirit. Secretary of State Kerry in Kiev. What is he bringing there that could help end this ongoing conflict?
Well, he's the one thing they have announced is that he's bringing a certain amount of humanitarian aid, promising humanitarian aid for the Ukrainians who, of course, have been suffering through this war for several months now. But the more controversial item that he's discussing in Ukraine today is the possibility of the United States providing what they're calling defensive weapons to the Ukrainians. These would be weapons that they would be using to fight against those Russian-backed rebels in the east. They are certainly outgunned in many areas by these rebels that are being armed, according to NATO, by the Russian government. Now, the open question is whether or not that will bring a quicker end to the war. Some people say that it may make things much worse.
And some people are thinking that that might actually antagonize. Have we heard from Russia, and how are they reacting, if at all, to Kerry's meeting and comments?
Right, well, the Russians are, of course, very worried about this. Today, the foreign ministry said that if the U.S. does go ahead and provide these defensive weapons to the Ukrainians, that this would have a huge negative impact on U.S.-Russia relations. Of course, U.S.-Russia relations have been in the pits for quite some time now, but really, the Russians say that this would be seen as a security threat to Russia.
And German Chancellor Angela Merkel and France's President François Hollande will also arrive in Kiev today and then travel to Moscow. Beyond the fighting, Ukraine is in also dire economic straits, right? Could this eventually help their economy?
Well, actually, I mean, the fighting has not been good for their economy. That's one thing. But today, we just had news of a massive fall in the Ukrainian currency. Ukraine is essentially running out of money. They had this big financial crisis last year, which to go back to the beginning of this whole thing, was the reason that you've had this conflict. The Europeans were going to strike a deal with the Ukrainians, and they pulled out of it and went to the Russians. And then when that happened, they had this massive street protest that we saw last year, which led to the ouster of the president, and ultimately to the Russians helping out these rebels in the east because they did not want a pro-Western government in Kiev. But the situation remains that the Ukrainians are basically running out of money. According to some reports, they only have enough reserves left for about 5 weeks of imports. So the fact that they were unable to continue propping up the value of their currency today is a huge problem for them.
So what are the concerns for France and Germany as they meet on this for the summit, and how is the U.S. reacting to this surprise summit?
Right. Well, this is something that I don't think many people saw coming. This was the French president and the German chancellor, Angela Merkel. They're going to be, as you said, they're going to be arriving in Kiev today, going to Moscow tomorrow to discuss what they're calling a new proposal. I can say that this is being received with some skepticism by some sides here, including the United States government, by the way, which remains very skeptical of diplomatic efforts. You heard Secretary Kerry earlier today saying that they do not need to turn their back on diplomacy right now, but they are very nervous about any deal that might be struck that might freeze this conflict, essentially closing it on Russia's terms. There was a deal that was struck for a ceasefire last year. That was basically never held to by either side, certainly not by the Russians, which continued to send arms and logistical support, and even, according to NATO, some regular troops across the border to help those rebels. And so what some sides are worried about is that if they do strike this deal, which could have potentially perhaps UN peacekeepers or some other way to at least end the fighting temporarily, that the fear is that this could freeze the conflict and essentially be another sort of de facto Russian state in between Ukraine and Russia.
All right, with this renewed effort on the diplomatic front, with all these world leaders trying to urge peace, give us an idea of what it is like in these cities in Ukraine and the violence. Has it slowed down any?
No, actually, well, on the contrary, and actually, that's one of the reasons we're seeing this flurry of diplomatic activity right now. The fighting in eastern Ukraine has only gotten significantly worse over the last week or so. Just yesterday, there were reports of artillery firing hitting near a hospital, near a school, into apartment buildings. You're seeing almost daily reports of civilians killed, certainly fighters on both sides being killed. And really, this has been going on both sides. Just yesterday, Human Rights Watch put out a report accusing the Ukrainian government of using cluster munitions in civilian areas, something that they've been accused of in the past and, of course, denied. So certainly lots of blame being thrown around on both sides here, and this fight not ending anytime soon.
All right, Kira Radia, thank you for joining us as always and getting us up to date. You can keep up with this story in real time by downloading the ABC News app and starring this story for exclusive updates on the go. For now, I'm Michelle Franzen in New York.